We say it all the time, longest off season in sports. We wait forever to see a college football game, but it also seems like forever we would have been waiting to talk some college football with Peter Burns. Peter, good to see you, man.
Marcus, good to see you, man. We were just talking about it. I can't believe it's already August 1st. So this is my favorite time of year. It's also my least favorite time of year because we're kind of like closing down summer. So football camps are opening and stuff like that. But one of the things I hate about it is that now we see it and it's so close, it's going to feel like so far away as well, right? Like this first week of camp is great. I see practice reports. I'm all fired up. And then I'm like, hurry up and get me to the damn regular season, because this arguably might be the best regular season we've had in 20 years or so.
Yeah, every day seems like forever. No doubt about that when we get to August. But at least we're within the month that we're going to see football. And let's start big picture. Of course, the SEC welcomes Oklahoma and Texas. You talk about forever and waiting. Of course, that was announced a long time ago. It's been years. So we've been waiting for Oklahoma and Texas and how they're going to play out in the SEC. Going to a national scale, the Big Ten and the SEC have kind of taken over this sport, and we expect to see it on the field. We are seeing it in every other measurement, revenue, media contracts, everything else going on. The Big Ten adds the four. The SEC has been the best conference, there's no question, for the last 15 to 20 plus years. Do you think that there's a possibility that the Big Ten could challenge this season?
Yeah, I mean, you go back and look at, Ohio State is probably as loaded as anybody. And, from all accounts, they've spent, $13-15 million when it comes to NIL money. So they're like, hey, if not now, when are we ever going to beat Michigan? So that's a team that's going to be out there. Curious to see what, Lincoln Riley does, retooling that defense, if it gets somewhat better, and how they're going to look without Caleb Williams. But I mean, the team that, I look at is Dan Lanning. What he's done over in Oregon has been really fun. So, those two teams are kind of the ones that are going to be joining the mix. I think Washington just replaces so much, including Kalen DeBoer. I think it's hard for them. I'm not going to say that they're going to falter like TCU did after the one great year that they made the college football playoff in the national championship game. However, I think there is a little bit of a drop off there. So, I think they're the second best conference in college football, and now adding Oregon and at least USC and Washington right now gives them a little bit more depth, because I always felt that it was Ohio State or Michigan. Penn State would always be kind of that third team, and then kind of like, all right, who else do you really take seriously? And at least now you're going to take a couple more teams seriously.
Based on your opening statement, Peter, I think I know which way you're leaning. So much change in college football. We've not seen it anything like what it's been for the last couple of years with the transfer portal, NIL, expansion, and of course the playoff at 12 this year. So on the good side, the consolidation of the best schools and the best programs in these two leagues have created these crazy matchups. The SEC already had them. Like you said, I think it gives even more depth to the Big Ten. There's a lot of good that we see. And again, the matchups, I think, more than anything else. And most people like this 12-team playoff and what it's going to provide. On the flip side, people get disgruntled, the fans, over NIL, the transfer portal, their favorite players don't stay with their teams. And then we've got this kind of breaking up of the regionalization of the sport where it's been stretched. The SEC's been about as close to integrity when it comes to any other conference and staying within their footprint. Where's the health of the sport?
By the way, Mark, it's always been important. DeSankey is he's always taken a little bit of pride in that of the fact of, hey, it's the contiguous states that are together in the SEC. As opposed to, you see the ACC having Cal and Stanford now, and Oregon being in the Big Ten and some of these other squads. So I think they've enjoyed that. But I don't think, I think I'm with you in the fact of, man, I miss the old Southwest Conference. I miss the big, the Pac-12 when it was there, and all these other conferences. And it does feel like there's a consolidation to me just of the Big Ten and the SEC as far as, at least on paper, who can compete year in and year out.
Yeah, because it seems like even beyond the football, and the styles of football were different in the different conferences. I think that's been morphed a little bit. And then beyond that, food, flavor, music, everything seemed a little bit different in each conference. So when they came together, there was a big clash that was kind of evident on the field even.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of what we love about college football, right? Is the fact that, hey, we like, all right, the Pac-12 for years, we're sitting there going, all right, they eliminate themselves, and then all of a sudden last year, look at how great of a year they had. I mean, look at the amount of draft picks. I'm not mistaken, they had, as many draft picks as kind of, a lot of different major conferences. So it's going to look different, but I will tell you that what fired me up earlier today is when the first time I log in, the first article I see is here are the 30 teams that can compete for the college football playoff. And Mark, can't recall, and you've covered this sport as good as anybody over the last couple of years. I can't recall the last time that we had more than 8 teams, 9 teams, maybe max, that we thought, if things go well, they could be a playoff team. The 12-team playoff changes all of that right now.
I'm right there with you. Peter, would love to get to as many teams as we possibly can in the SEC. So I'm going to start close to home. You love your Bayou Bengals. I'm trying to figure this team out because I know they're good. I know there's talent there, but I hear about the worst secondary they ever had last year and that it's been somewhat fixed. Blake Baker comes in from Mizzou to fix problems. I hear about a defensive front that usually is dominant, that has a ton of question marks. No proven like star running back. I know that the wide receiver position should take care of itself with Kyron Lacey and others. Jaden Daniels was the offense. Garrett Nussmeier is good. I believe he's going to be good, but Jaden Daniels was Superman.
Well, and the way he did it was different, right? I mean, he became such a pain for every defender because not only could he throw the deep ball very accurately, but he also could take off and run. And when he did, he was a cheetah. I mean, I was there on the field watching him just gash Florida defenders, and like, there's a different speed that he had, right? And Garrett Nussmeier is not that. Garrett Nussmeier is by far much of a pocket passing quarterback, but also I think LSU and Brian Kelly's smart enough to understand that they're not going to run that same offense that they did last year. Joe Sloan, as their new offensive coordinator, realizes that this might be the best offensive line that LSU possibly has had in the last 2 decades. And so I do think that it's going to be a lot more running the ball. I do think it's going to be a lot more, kind of shorter length passes, kind of how Oregon run their offense a little bit more of last year, as opposed to a real vertical passing attack with Garrett Nussmeier. And Brian Kelly, told me over at Media Days last week, he goes, Garrett Nussmeier's been careless, right? But he's no different than careless with it's like having a car that you borrow from somebody that you're like, all right, it's not my car, right? But now when it's your keys and you just, bought the vehicle, like you wash it every day, you keep it, you make sure it's nice and clean. He's like, Nussmeier's understanding that, hey, this is now his vehicle. The keys to the program are his, and he's acted a completely, a lot different, especially in some of those fall practices.
Is the dividing line for LSU basically, we got to make the playoff this year for this to be a successful season?
Yeah, I mean, that's the dividing line for LSU every single year, regardless if it's 2 teams, 4 teams, 12 teams, or however many teams are in the playoff. The defense is going to be better, mostly because it can't be any worse. And offensively, let's say last year they were on a 10, they could still be an 8.5. But the defense last year was about a 2. That's why they couldn't win the games that they needed to, especially Ole Miss. So if that defense can get to like a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, and Harold Perkins is in a better position to become a star, then all of a sudden, yeah, I mean, that opener against USC, if they win, I don't see 3 other losses on their schedule. And a 10-2 with that schedule is probably going to the college football playoff.
You hit on a guy that I'm not questioning the guys that know the X's and O's, because their coaching staff certainly knows more than I do of what to do with Harold Perkins. But wasn't this guy arguably the best defensive player in college football 2 years ago? It just seemed like every game he wrecked, and they seemed to be kind of boxing him into this inside linebacker spot.
Well, and that's on LSU's coaching staff, and it's also on Perkins and his team as well too, because everybody that came in, it's not only, hey, are you a great college football player, but how are they getting you prepared for the next level? And I think with Perkins is, he wanted to learn middle linebacker. He understood that, hey, he's a little bit undersized, so if he's going to play, he wants to be more of a linebacker type guy. And so last year they tried to put him in that role. They had him try to kind of think and react a little bit more. And Harold Perkins is a guy that you just want to get on the field and go, dude, see ball, go get ball. And I think that's where they're going to put him in a position last year. So, yeah, I mean, they tried, but also I think there wasn't this, it was frustrating for everybody, including Harold Perkins, who wanted to strive at that position, but it just wasn't the right fit for him.
Peter Burns, SEC Network. Peter, it's kind of hard to believe if we were sitting here having this conversation 1 year ago, Eli Drinkwitz had a worse record than Barry Odom. Now everything seems to be the
Yeah.
talent on the field, especially the offense. The recruiting's headed in the right direction. He seems to be leading this team to the brink of a college football playoff. Now, they did lose a ton on defense. How good do you think Mizzou can be?
I mean, as good as Brady Cook will be, their quarterback. I mean, him and Luther Burden, Mookie Wilson, all those guys. I mean, that's as talented of a bunch that you're going to see. Now they had the kid Cody Schrader, who was great last year, the kind of walk on running back who became all world. But I think that's just a credit to Drink finding the guys that fit his system and want to be there. They kind of remind me of when Mississippi State had really good teams where they're guys that played with a chip on their shoulder and like, hey, I didn't get recruited by Georgia or Ohio State or Michigan, but guess what? I can sure as hell play. And kind of how Mark Stoops had some of those Kentucky teams when they won 10 wins. So, I mean, the schedule sets up as good as anything. I mean, they got Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vanderbilt right from the jump. I mean, you're going 4-0 there. Your road game is going to be at A&M and at Bama, and that's all the hard road games you have. And A&M is a beatable team, and Alabama we're still trying to figure out what they're going to be like with Kalen DeBoer, which I think is really good. But Missouri's got the firepower, and look at how they played Georgia the last couple of years. They're not scared of anybody.
It was fun to see the interaction between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban on your network in particular. That was really fun to see because you kind of see a little bit behind the scenes and that dynamic when they were on the same staff. How has Kirby Smart basically become our current Nick Saban?
I mean, you remember that I mean, you're probably the same age that I am, so we used to have that commercial of like, why are you doing drugs? They're like, I learned it from watching you, right? Like it was like an old PSA back in the day. Well, how did you dominate college football? I learned it from watching you. I mean, he was there at a front row seat to how Saban was obsessed about recruiting and defense, and he's done it. And so, Kirby's become the gold standard of football. It's funny, Mark, at media days, we didn't even really talk about Georgia. It's almost like in a 12-team playoff, we're like, okay, well, they're in. What other teams excite you? And so it's, they've kind of become like the IRS where you just know that they're going to be there every single year and you can't do anything about it. And they're, Carson Beck, they're loaded once again defensively. I mean, you look at they get off the bus, Mark, and they look better than some NFL teams right now. It's truly ridiculous.
Ra Thomas won't be there. We just heard today that he's been dismissed from the team. A bit of a unfortunate situation. Did some horrible things, family violence. That's what he's being charged with right now. Okay, driving incidents. We're up to like 24 for a year. It's just this strange occurrence that many incidents would have that all line up in the same category for this program.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, and I've talked to some people on the ground, and trust me, that they are very aware of it, and they're very aware of it simply for the fact of what happened a couple of years ago after the championship game, where you had the tragic death of a player and a staffer, and then they start doing some digging, and they realize, hey man, they've been having some issues with driving before, and so I think what happened, Mark, is that a lot of the Athens Police Department says, hey, listen, anytime that we pull over a Georgia football player, I don't care if you forgot to put your blinker on left, I'm gonna have to give you a ticket and arrest you. It's that simple, because it's almost like the Athens Police Department has had like a zero tolerance policy because of what happened in the past. And so, I've talked to them because I rant and raved last year about Kirby going, why aren't you kicking these guys off the team? Right? Like, it's a privilege to play football for Georgia. And basically, now I kind of understand a little bit more of it going, hey, what if you were some 18-year-old kid, you've never been in trouble, whatever in your life, and all of a sudden, hey, you took, you don't know your way around Athens, you went down the wrong way on a one-way or something like that, whoop, whoop, the cop pulls you over, you've never been in trouble, got a clean record, and so now you're kicked off the team, it's a fine line. And I think where Kirby in Georgia, and I think more teams are going to start doing this, is now they're going to start dipping into the NIL agreements that they have with these guys and go, listen, if you get in trouble, hey, guess what? That's going to affect your pocketbook at some point. And so that's a developing punishment that some of these guys can eventually end up being a part of. And I'm kind of curious to see if more schools go down that road.
And we talk about Saban and Smart and that connection. That seems to be one thing that Nick Saban just had the golden Midas touch of taking some troubled guys that made some bad decision, but knowing, hey, we're not going to kick them off the team. We're going to work with him. And it usually, you can't predict the future, but it usually turned out to be the right decision. One last team, Tennessee. They seem to be in that category for me as well. Do they break to the positive side or the negative side?
That is, it's funny because when we talk so much about Texas, Oklahoma, and Alabama with Kalen DeBoer and all that stuff. This kind of upper middle tier of the SEC, we didn't talk about a lot. So I'm glad you asked me about Tennessee. I'm bullish on them, and the fact of Nico Iamaleava, like, get used to saying that name, the same way we talked about Tua, right? Because he's going to be a star. I do think that it probably comes more than likely next year, but this more than likely feels like a team in which, all right, let's gather everybody around. Because remember, they were still on some type of small probation and scholarship issues going back to the Jeremy Pruitt stuff. So this is kind of the first time that Heupel's been able to go in and get full recruiting classes. So, for Tennessee, I look at this as more of kind of like a 8-4, 9-3 season where offensively they're going to give some people some hell, but I think there's going to be some growing pains for Nico. And ultimately, when it comes down to it, hey man, that's they're going to upset some people, kind of like Oklahoma too. I think Oklahoma and Tennessee are two teams that are kind of laying in the weeds. And I'll give you one more team before we leave. Jeff Lebby over at Mississippi State is no one's talking about them. And they remind me a whole heck of a lot of Ole Miss the first year that Lane Kiffin got there. And the fact of, like, people are going to show up, go, well, wait a minute, we don't necessarily have the personnel, but man, that offense is fun. Because, I mean, if you remember, it was Levy's offense that really got Lane Kiffin rolling. I mean, Lane pretty much takes a back seat, and now he's the head coach. So somebody else is calling that offense. So having Levy now call that offense, he's got Blake Shapen, who I was really impressed with. I don't know if they win 5 games this year, 6 games maybe, but they're going to sneak up on somebody, and somebody's not going to be ready, and all of a sudden get punched in the throat and go, what in the world was that? How are we down 21-10 early?
And I don't think people nationally realize Lane Kiffin, Jeff Lebby, sure, they love to spread you out, but strong rushing attacks.
Yeah, I mean, that's always to me. And I was, everybody thinks it's, Lane Kiffin throwing the clipboard up because they throw some 60-yard dime. Well, the only reason why that dime is open is because everybody has to put almost 7 and 8 in the box because Lane's so creative with his RPO, and Jeff Lebby was so creative with the RPO. So, yeah, that you'll lose. You can win a lot of money in a bar bet. Go, did Lane Kiffin teams throw the ball more or pass the ball more? Like, what's their run percentage? And I'm not mistaken, I think it's close to like 65% run, which will shock a lot of people.
Top 3 in the SEC, I think, back-to-back years in rushing when Lebby was running the offense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be fun, man. Now you got me fired up for it. So now I gotta wait. 4 weeks. So.
And one last thing on Heupel, it's similar to Kiffin. Impressed that he comes in as an offensive guy, and sometimes they get the rep that they don't care about defense. They just want to put up numbers, but instantly addressed defense and recruiting, transfer portal, and instantly got better.
Yeah, I mean, James Pierce. I mean, you talk about guys like Harold Perkins. Pierce is going to be one of the biggest game records that we saw last year. So, like I said, what the SEC is going to look like, and we've always said it, hey, it's kind of the miniature NFL. It truly is going to look that way because I think there's going to be a lot of teams that can go 7-5, that will go 6-6. That if I put them in another, if I put them in the ACC or the Big 12, probably would win a couple more games. It's just going to be an absolute battle. Every single. I remember when in the NL East, back when the Yankees and the Red Sox were going to war, and all of a sudden you'd have some other teams that it's going to feel like that every single week in this conference.
7-5 for Florida would look pretty. They better be in the top 25 if they're 7-5 with that schedule.
It's a tough schedule. I mean, that game against Miami is everything. It's at home. It's against a hated rival. Miami's going to come in as a touchdown favorite, and there's 3 results in that game. It is you win and everybody goes crazy, and everybody's like, all right, because I think they're going to be pretty good. I think they're going to be better than Vegas thinks, which only they're only predicting 4.5 wins. I think they can get 5 or 6, which is crazy to be like Florida, 5 or 6 wins. I mean, to think about it. But everything hinges on that Miami game. They win that Miami game, they're still going to struggle because how tough that schedule is. But man, if you lose it, and especially if you lose it bad to Miami, that's tough. And I love Billy Napier. I think he's a great coach. It's tough, man, especially in the state of Florida with, Gus Malzahn is going to be there over at UCF. They'll play them. Mario's got recruiting in Miami doing well. FSU, Norvell. I know they lost a lot, but that's going to be a great game at the end of the year too.
Yeah, I don't think Florida knew that they were going to get that SEC schedule when they scheduled Miami, Florida State, and UCF outside the conference. Obviously, they always play FSU, but they get that.
But all those teams, Miami, Miami can be beat. I mean, it's a huge brand, but Miami hasn't been great. They've been, in fact, some of the most underperforming teams as of late. FSU has been beatable outside of last year when they absolutely struck gold, and Jordan Travis was incredible, and Norvell did a great job. And then, UCF, Malzahn has had a little bit of success. Remember, KJ Jefferson, the old Arkansas quarterback, is going to be down there as well. So it's a lot of coin flip games for Florida, and you better be on your coin flip game for Billy Napier.
Peter Burns, SEC Network. Peter, it's great to see you. Thanks for dropping by.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it, man.